ink on my fingers hasn't even dried yet, but my hands are, well, they aren't shaking exactly, but they have this unfamiliar stiffness in the joints tonight. The air coming through the masonry gaps doesn't smell like the valley pines or the cold iron of the gears anymore. It smells like copper after a lightning strike. Sharp, ionized, and slightly metallic, as if the upper atmosphere has been scorched by an invisible furnace. The background music drifting up from the lower levels is keeping a very strange, steady pulse this evening. It feels less like a drifting melody, more like a long, drawn-out echo of a bell that was struck miles away, vibrating through the stone foundations and holding the rafters in a permanent state of suspension. It's an incredible comfort right now, because everything else up here is completely shifted out of its proper alignment. If you look through the circular pane of glass behind the desk, you don't even need the brass lens tonight. The naked eye can see it perfectly. About 2 hours ago, right as I was melting the wax to seal the Third Dynasty ledgers, a sudden, piercing crimson flare ignited in the absolute center of the Great Bear constellation. It wasn't a slow burn like a standard nova, and it wasn't a sudden plunge like a falling comet. It was a deliberate, violent fracture, a line of pure, bleeding ruby light that stretched outward from the Alpha Star, cutting clean through the ancient geometric boundaries we've been tracking for centuries, before anchoring itself into the dark void below. For 300 years, the observers in this tower have abided by a singular, unshakable law. The sky is a scroll to be read, never an invitation to be followed. We sit on this high wooden stool, we polish the glass, we write down the numbers, and we let the world happen down below, while we remain entirely unbothered by the dirt and the politics of the valley. We are supposed to be ghosts who keep the records. But that ruby line didn't just rearrange the coordinates on my parchment. When the light hit the objective glass of the telescope, it cast a sharp, bleeding red grid across the opposite wall, illuminating a hidden doorway in the brickwork that I have never seen in all my years of pacing this floor. It made me realize something rather terrifying while I was sitting here in the dark, watching the crimson reflection dance across the leather bindings. The tower isn't a fortress designed to protect the knowledge of the stars from the ignorance of the world below. It's a cage designed to keep the astronomer from participating in the very geometry they are measuring. We spend our entire lives cataloging the migrations of the high-altitude skiffs and the fading of the northern crown, but we never actually taste the wind that carries them. I've spent the last hour doing something completely unprecedented in the history of this watchtower. I haven't been cleaning the lenses. I haven't been sorting the river pebbles by their shades of gray. I've been packing a small leather traveling satchel. I put in 3 blank pieces of hemp paper, a single horn inkwell that I wrap tightly in oiled cloth to keep from spilling, and the small brass key that fits absolutely none of the locks in this room. My heavy wool traveling cloak, the one that usually just sits in the corner smelling of turf smoke and cedar, is draped over the back of the chair right now, waiting for me to pull it over my shoulders. It feels completely surreal to even contemplate stepping over the threshold of that spiral staircase with the intention of going all the way to the bottom. The steps are narrow, and and they've been worn down into smooth, slippery hollows by generations of boots that have only ever walked up, never down into the unmapped thickets of the outer world. I don't even know if my legs remember how to navigate a path that doesn't move in a circle. Up here, everything is cyclical. The stars spin, the hourglass turns, the music loops, and the shadows return to the exact same floorboards every morning at dawn. But out there, beyond the heavy iron gates at the base of the mountain, the road just keeps going in a straight, terrifying line until it vanishes into the trees. The lavender oil in the lantern brackets has nearly turned to crust, leaving a faint, slightly bitter floral trace in the air that mixes with the cold, damp scent of the impending winter storm. My eyelids are incredibly heavy right now, but it isn't the usual comforting exhaustion that comes from a long night of counting coordinates. It's the heavy, quiet adrenaline of a prisoner who has finally noticed that the lock on the cell door was never actually latched. It's a beautifully drowsy sort of panic. There is an old parable written in the footnotes of Orestes' ledger about a sailor who spent 40 years perched in the crow's nest of a great flagship, tracking the movements of the coastal lighthouses so the captain would never run aground on the reef. He knew every rock, every hidden sandbar, and every shifting current along the entire perimeter of the continent. But he never once permitted his feet to touch the dry sand of the beaches. When the ship finally docked for the last time, and the crew dismantled the timber to build houses on the shore, the sailor refused to leave his perch. He stayed up in the rotting ropes until the wood turned to dust, staring out at an ocean he had completely mastered with his eyes, but had never once touched with his skin. I don't want to be the sailor in the rotting ropes. I don't want the future observers of this tower to find my bones slumped over a brass viewing tube, surrounded by thousands of pages of perfect, flawless numbers that never did anything but gather dust in an empty attic. If the sky is going to break its own rules and paint a crimson highway across the void, then I think the record keeper has a duty to follow the ink wherever it decides to run. The music downstairs is beginning to stretch into these long, fading whispers of sound, the individual chords pulling apart like the stars in the Northern Crown, leaving massive, peaceful gaps of silence between each note. The candle on the desk is drowning in its own wax, the flame shrinking down into a tiny blue-hearted point of light that barely manages to illuminate the edge of my traveling satchel. It's time to go. The ledgers are closed, the lenses are covered, and the grand objective glass can keep its phantom emerald cities and its bleeding stars to itself for a while. You don't need to stay awake to guard the watchtower tonight. The stone walls have survived 3 dynasties without us, and they will survive the winter frost just fine. Let the numbers slip off the page. Let the schedules dissolve into the dark corners of the ceiling. We are letting the lanterns go out. We are pulling the heavy cloak tight against the draft, and we're going to take that very first, unhurried step down into the quiet, untracked dark of the mountain trail. Tell me, if a light suddenly appeared in the deepest dark of your own life, shattering every rule and routine you've ever built to keep yourself safe, would you stay in the comfort of your watchtower and record it? Or would you pack your bag and follow the flare into the unknown